And I'm available to answer any questions that you may want, and I hope that I was helpful to you. Thank you.
With all the austerity down in Trenton,
Right.
everything we hear about Governor Christie doing, what has impacted you the most? Where's Fort Lee felt the impact greatest? Was it on pension reform? What has affected Fort Lee the most?
You mean in a good way?
In a good way and a bad way?
In a good way, not all, but some of the retirements were prompted by, for example, the imposition on public employees of 1.5% contribution for their health benefits. And because of that, that prompted some, not all, to retire. And that was helpful because it relieved us of salary. And I've met with the governor, I went to law school with the governor, I know his chief of staff, I'm in communicate with them quite a bit because I am supportive of many of his initiatives. On the other side of that, it was a bit of a brain drain. I wish it was done a little slower because I now have to scramble and make sure that the right folks are in the right departments, because don't forget, those that retire are either in charge of their department or have the most experience in their department because they've been on the job 25, 30, 35 years. So the good is it encouraged folks in a civil way to retire. The bad news is it left me with having to make sure that we found the talent and were able to deliver the service that folks are accustomed to. Number one, just to throw some numbers at you, police officers, what retirement means. An officer, now remember, somebody that retires, that means they're at the top of their pay scale. It also means that they've been on the job 25, 30 years. A patrolman that's ready for retirement in Fort Lee costs us about $225,000 a year. That's their salary, that's their overtime, that's their pension contribution, that's their health benefits. The day that that patrolman retires, the cost to the community goes down to about $24,700 per year. That's the cost of their health care plan. So the only thing we're responsible for upon retirement is health care plan, their health insurance. A sergeant is about $245, a lieutenant is about $250, $255, a captain is $260. I mean, these numbers vary, but you're talking, and healthcare is the same for all rank. So, for example, the sergeant that costs us $250 a year, we dip down to $24,000 and change for health insurance. So you're talking couple $100,000 plus every time one of these, men or women retire. And I'm not bashing the police, I'm just giving you numbers. On the police, you also, just to touch upon that, I'm not in agreement with the last contract when I became mayor. We were in the middle of a contract, and I just still not happy with those terms. We are in arbitration because we just can't reach a settlement. And I told you in the beginning of this talk that everybody needs to sacrifice a little, everybody needs to be no one can be immune from this economy. And so we're dealing with that. And I vowed to the community that we would devote all our resources to making sure that these collective bargaining agreements were negotiated as vigorously and as zealously as possible, and I can assure you that they are. So to answer your question, Chris, it's employees retiring, and the bad side of that, quite frankly, is having to deal with what they call the brain drain. But many of these retirements were scheduled anyway, which is also good. Who else is out there? Yes, ma'am.
Funded?
I'm not saying that. That's a state responsibility. I'm saying to you that Fort Lee's pension obligations, the monies that we're required to pay for our retirees, are fully funded. There's no void. There's no borrowing associated with that. That's all budgeted for. We have no budget deficit. We don't run like the state or alternatively the nation. You might hear about a lack of funding for pensions and so forth and so on. That's not necessarily our problem, but our required contributions are paid, are down there already, and we've dealt with that, and that's already been budgeted for. Yes, sir?
Yeah, at what point do we see meaningful tax revenues from the vacant land?
Great question, and I should have said that before. Right now, you're seeing, $1.5 million from it, and it's not having much of an impact as far as services that it requires. The timeline on it, Alex, it's difficult. It's estimated to be a $700 or $800 million build out, presuming it gets and passes planning board muster. You know, we've heard numbers as high as $15 to $18 million in actual tax dollars, and as low as $7 or $8 million in actual tax dollars. And I think that that's going to have a lot to do because the tax bills are based on what the values of the units are, what the value or what the income generated by the commercial properties are, and that is directly impacted by the status of the economy. So if it is a good economy, or at least a decent economy, and it will be, because, you know, developers of a project of this size will tell you that the time for them to build and develop is in the midst of or at the tail end of a poor economy. Because generally speaking, that's when interest rates are low, and generally speaking, they need that time to build, and they won't lose the market. In theory, they'll be completing once that market has resurrected and is waiting for them. So that's attractive to this site, if you could believe that, and I do. But I would say to you that a decent number would be anywhere from $8 to $10 million net. When I say net, not net of what it costs us to participate in that, but $8 to $10 million in revenue to the Borough of Fort Lee.
That's when it's fully constructed.
Fully constructed.
During the construction period, which could take a number of years.
Yes.
There's really nothing additional.
No, you're looking at, right now, the tax dollars that are generated at that site, you're looking at several hundreds of thousands of dollars each year just for vacant land, because vacant land too has a value. Don't forget, you know, folks called that, some people in the know called it the most valuable vacant land in the Northeast at one point. So, yeah, it's a lot less valuable vacant, but there's gonna come a point that once we rezone it to the density that we're talking about, that has a value. Then as they build, that has a value, so it will only get progressively better. Right now, it's the lowest it's gonna be. But once it's completed, like I said, I mean, we're hopeful it's gonna be in that $9 to $10 million, and I'm glad you brought that up. While all of this is going on, we also told the developers that there's no chance they're coming to town without making sure that we obtain some sort of public amenity. And what I mean by a public amenity is some sort of benefit. And don't tell me that the benefit is, well, we're going to build a piece of property that's laid fallow for 45 years. So here are some of your benefits. Benefit number one, on the west side, we are going to have a, not 1 acre, just under 1 acre public park, which is going to introduce you to this entire development. It's going to be a passive park for people to walk through with pads and a fountain and just an introduction to what was formerly known as Centuria, which is about to be known as Hudson Lights, which we think is wonderful. It's going to be in a very conspicuous spot so that the world sees that. The next public amenity on the east parcel, we are going to be the proud owners. It's getting deeded back to us, a 2-acre parcel in between the two residential structures. That's going to be for complete access to the borough, where you can walk there anytime you like. Part of the negotiations, I insisted that at least one restaurant and one coffee shop be built with access to that park, so that you're having dinner when it's nice out, you could have outdoor dining. When it's in the winter, you can walk to and from. And in that park will also be passive. There'll be pads and benches and fountains and things of that nature. So there's a 2-acre park on the east parcel, under a 1-acre park on the west parcel. But perhaps the greatest is on the corner of Martha Washington and Main Street. We've successfully negotiated the donation of a theater. A local theater for Fort Lee, which now it took a lot of work, and I really would appreciate the applause because we spent a lot of time doing it. It's going to be a 3-screen theater, which is going to be for those independent films, which are going to be for local filmmakers. It's going to celebrate the movie history of the Borough of Fort Lee. It's going to be constructed and designed so that it's tastefully done with the appropriate facade. It's going to be conspicuous at the corner of Martha Washington and Main Street. There's going to be an entrance with 3 separate theaters. There's going to be parking that's donated by the developer on site for some of it. The rest of it we're going to accommodate. And on a Thursday night, on a Friday night, you're going to have a choice of theaters. You're going to have a choice of movies. Not every night we'll have movies. We've been consulting with, just so you know, theater operators and owners to make sure we do it the right way. In other words, how many seats should be in these theaters? We have one with only 75 seats, and we have another one with a couple hundred seats, because different shows and different movies require different populace, different amounts of folks to go. We did it that way too, so that if we only have one movie showing, we don't have to open up the whole operation. We could devote it to one particular area. And I just think that that would be a phenomenal idea. So envision this one day, You're gonna be able to go to a theater, there'll be an opening night, there'll be an independent film of some sort celebrating either a local filmmaker or something that you've always wanted to see. I'm not talking about blockbuster films, I'm talking about, you know, local films and independent films, films that, you know, you can go to a movie theater to see. And after that or before that, you could go to a choice of several different restaurants, or go have a glass of wine, or go have a cup of coffee, and that's what I'm envisioning this development to be. And you know, I'll just talk about this redevelopment 5, and I promise you're next, but you know, I too wanted that property to be a park. I would have loved nothing more than it to be grassy fields with cobblestone pathways and a Dean and DeLuca coffee shop every couple hundred feet. I mean, that's what I wanted. And I would have loved an outdoor amphitheater, and I would have loved that it just be grassy knolls and this pristine park, but we don't own it. It's not our property. It's privately owned property. And because of that, if you want that type of park style, you're looking at $80 or $100 million to buy it. You're looking at bonding to the tune of $80 or $100 million. So when you talk about reducing your taxes on your tax bill, I can assure you we could have impacted it if we bought it. So we didn't go that route because we didn't believe it to be economically feasible. We also believed that Fort Lee needed a commercial renaissance, so we've always had to balance what's going to get built there and making sure it's economically feasible by the developer. So yeah, I get it. I too would have loved to have had this park-like setting, but if I did it, I could tell you right now, the tone of your questions would be a little different to me tonight. Yes?
Roughly how many residential units are we talking about now?
Roughly, well again, it's still subject to
Right.
approval by the planning board, but you're looking at, on the east, the west, I don't have a definitive number, on the east, you're looking at 800 to 900 units. Our tax bill, for every dollar we collect, about 40 or 50 cents goes to the school district. So that $10 million number that I gave you, they're gonna generate about $5 million, number one, per year, at a minimum, at a minimum. Number two, we, in our negotiations, vehemently objected to a high percentage of 3-bedroom apartments in this development. And I could tell you that the 3 bedrooms in these residential, in these apartments are limited. It's a single-digit percentage of what's going there. And studies show, and I'm a land use attorney by trade, you are talking probably, I would venture a guess and say, in the double digits of school children that are going to be generated by this development. And I know what the answer is, the system can't afford one more. I get it. But with an influx of $4 or $5 million in cash flow per year, even if they get that 50 or 60 school kids, I have a feeling they're going to be able to manage, because the cost of handling that is going to be dramatically less than the income that they're generating. And I can assure you, during the course of these negotiations, that was absolutely one of our priorities, to make sure that we don't overwhelm the district, because I get it, and I know that they're overcrowded. But the studies and the information that are in front of us, based on the way we've laid out these projects, number one, number two, the bedroom count that we've required that they meet, and number two, the financial gain that the district will receive, far outweighs any adverse impact that this project will have on the school district. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Traffic.
Yes.
How are we going to handle more traffic? I've tried to get into the city, and from Mid-South to the bridge, it's already taken
I
me
got it.
15, 20 minutes.
I got it. We're in again, that's during the planning board process. That's why I was hesitant to even throw a number out there, because I don't know, can't give you a definitive number, because we need to go through the planning board process. We need to look at traffic studies still. We need to look at, expansions of streets, the public transportation that's gonna be available, the ferry service that's gonna be available, so forth and so on. But I can assure you, nothing's gonna get built that's going to bring that area to a complete standstill. We're also talking about or contemplating having direct access to the bridge from the development, so there's a whole host of different things that are gonna come into play. But you may rest assured that we're not going to bring something into town that's going to have, or bring that area of town into a complete standstill. I get it, it's a problem. I mean, this